here's the question of the day. What is the role of women in the church? What is the role of the women in the church today when it comes to Christianity? What is the role of women within the Catholic Church more specifically? We are under the impression that women are oppressed in the church, and you have so many women who are fighting against this, who are demanding that women are able to be priests, that they take on these leadership roles within the church, which have been prohibited and prevented from women and by women to be able to do this. Or not really by women, that's the wrong thing. It's been prevented for women to be able to participate in leadership roles in the faith. And that has a lot to do, or everything, not even a lot, it has everything to do with scripture, which we're going to get into in a moment. Today's stories that we're going to cover brings this question about the role of women in the faith front and center. And I want to challenge you to come up with options. If women can't be priests, what are other ways that women can shine? So we're going to lead in our first segment today with a recent story, which I feel, even though it's not about us as Catholics, I feel that it still is pertinent to this conversation. Recently, there was a congregation, a Southern Baptist congregation, that was ousted from the denomination because of its female pastors. Oh yeah, baby, it is getting hot in the seat out there. Now, there was an article that came up on CNN. I know, listen, just stay with me on this. It's actually a good article. An article that came out on CNN that covered this that I want to go ahead and dig into right now. Let's go ahead and read this article. Southern Baptist let's start that again. The Southern Baptist Convention votes to uphold removal of Saddleback Church over women pastors after appeal by Rick Warren. Now, this came out on June 15, 2023. The annual meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention voted to affirm a decision made earlier this year to remove Saddleback Church, a major Southern California congregation founded by the pastor and author Rick Warren, due to its having women pastors. Representatives at the conference in New Orleans overwhelmingly supported the decision to expel the church, according to the vote count reported Wednesday morning, despite pleas a day earlier by Warren, the author of The Purpose-Driven Life. The representatives, known as messengers, also voted to affirm the ousters of two other churches, including Fern Creek in Louisville, Kentucky, which has had a female pastor since 1993. The vote to uphold those removals came just a few hours before a 2/3 majority of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, separately voted to approve an amendment to its constitution that would more broadly prohibit churches from having women hold any pastoral title. The amendment must pass by a 2/3 vote 2 years in a row, with Wednesday's vote marking its first. The Baptist Press, which describes itself as the SBC's official news service, reported Saddleback was found not to be in friendly cooperation with the SBC's statement of faith, which says, in part, that the office of pastor is limited to men. Warren was among those who asked the SBC to reverse the February decision on Tuesday. He appealed to the representatives to, quote unquote, act like Southern Baptists who have historically agreed to disagree on dozens of doctrines in order to share a common mission, per the New York Times, which reported Warren appointed a husband and wife to succeed him after his retirement in 2021. 3 more women were ordained as pastors at Saddleback that year, according to Baptist Press. Voters were unconvinced. Per the Baptist Press, 9,437 votes were cast in favor of upholding the decision, compared to 1,212 against. Fern Creek Baptist appeal was similarly rejected, with 9,700 voting in favor of upholding the decision and 806 voting against it. Remember, that specific church has had a female pastor since 1993, so this overwhelming amount of folks really want to see them out of there. Linda Barnes Popham, the pastor of Fern Creek Baptist, told CNN this morning, Thursday, her church would continue to lift high the gospel of Jesus Christ, but the expulsion felt like a divorce. On the other hand, there's something liberating and freeing being bound no more to the traditions and opinions and the power of those in leadership in the Southern Baptist Convention. Still, the fallout will be felt for generations, Barnes Popham indicated, recalling how a 14-year-old girl sought her out in the crowd and wept in her arms, telling her, "I'm 14 years old, and when I was 11, God called me to be a minister, and now I can't do that in the family that I love." She continues saying it's such a sad, sad thing for her. She's grown up in this denomination, and so have her parents, and her dreams to be a pastor in the denomination that she loved. In his own statement, Warren said the next generation won't care about arcane procedures and political infighting. So powerful, so important for us as Catholics. Let me break this down. Why? Because the conversation on this end is very similar. Many people, particularly women of the older generation, want to see female priests. They want to see female deaconesses. They want to see women taking on leadership roles in the church, and they don't seem to agree with why that is not possible for what we believe as Christians. And I think, ironically, these same women that bring this up never look at ways that women can actually be used in the faith. They never bring up ways, particularly when we talk about Catholicism, because when you talk about Protestants and stuff like that, their whole thing is completely different. But in our faith, we have the means for women to be substantial and be visible in the faith through our sisters and our nuns. In our next segment later on today, we're going to be talking about a 200-year-old institution that is closing, a 200-year-old religious order that is closing its doors because they don't have enough women coming in with interest to join their order. That should never be happening today, particularly when the voice is to say that women need more of a role. Now, why? Why don't women have this place? Well, it goes back to the Bible. In fact, if we look specifically at 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 to 12, this is a chapter where Paul talks about head covering and submission and the order of submission. And it's such a beautiful thing. And any one of us who veils, you should know and understand that scripture by heart, by rote, because that is where our veiling, the root of it, truly comes from. For me, as a woman that veils, I don't see this submission thing as something that's bad. To me, it's a beautiful thing. Because when I am a married woman, I am called to submit to my husband. But what does that mean? It does not mean subservience, because all throughout the Bible, we are taught that men and women, we are equal in our value. We are mutually submitted to each other, right? Paul talks about that in Ephesians, that women and men, husband and wife, are in submission to each other and both to God. But for me to even understand that before I'm married, I have to be in submission to someone. Who am I supposed to be in submission to? The Lord above. That is what head coverings mean for me and what I encourage other women to understand. The next place where we see Paul go into the order and leadership when it comes to women is in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 34 to 35, where he says that women must remain silent while in church. And there was a reason that this was said, and it's not in the way that people like to pose this, right? He was saying that women need to be silent in church, and that if they have questions, to go ahead and ask their husbands later on. Now, there's lots of theories as to why this was said. And it wasn't about women not having a place in the church. Keep in mind that in 1 Corinthians, back in that chapter 11, Paul talks about women being able to pray, worship, and prophesy in the temple, that they were allowed to do that, but they had to do it with their heads covered in submission to God and in submission to their husbands. Where does it say that women are not allowed a voice? They are not allowed to lead. It's also known that there was a lot of disorder going on in Corinth at that time, that the church was all over the place, their worship was all over the place, and they needed leadership. They needed organization. And as men in that culture, in that time, and even to this day, men have the leadership role and position. So men were put there and edified to lead as Christ leads the church. It's all connected. And in that way, we as women are the literal brides of the church, the brides of Christ, and eventually the brides of our husbands for those of us who end up being married. And even still, if you're not, you are still in submission to the Lord. So this whole thing about Paul going into women staying silent in church was silent during times where discussions were being had, where lessons were being taught. There's also some theories that women who were less educated, perhaps women who were less knowledgeable about scripture, were very vocal at that time. And they were trying to make sure that order remained within the congregation so that way the word could be heard. So in that respect, it comes back to the very, very clear message that we as women have a role. And to twist the Bible in a way to try to strong arm our presence in a way that's not ordered is a detriment. And I think that that's a big problem that we're seeing within our society as a whole today. Now, there is another thing that was said in this article, which was very concerning to me. And that is this passage or this thing that was said about we have to agree to disagree. And that's a problematic approach when it comes to faith of any kind. The other thing that was also said to go into that was that the female pastor who was ousted had said that, our congregation is going to still worship the Lord, which is beautiful. But she said in a way that, she had this 14-year-old girl who was crying and didn't know her role in place. And I think that's a failure on the part of the women in the church. Do you mean to tell me that out of all the women in the church, in the congregation, the only thing that they have that's useful for leading other women and being examples for men of what virtuous women looks like is on the pulpit? This is where we get to take our power as women and to really stand in that and to create our presence that can be felt and that can be heard, that can be seen. As women, we are the connecting fiber when it comes to society, when it comes to everything. We are the builders of the community. That is a part of who we are. Why isn't that being utilized? And the final thing that really just boiled my blood was the statement that Warren made at the end of our article. And that was how he said that the next generation won't care about these arcane traditions and wanting to see more women in power in places of position in the church outside of what God has willed for us. And I think that, at least for us as Catholics, he is sorely mistaken. And anyone who believes that, you are sorely mistaken. Did you know that within the traditional Latin Mass, that the largest numbers of people, the congregation, is being made up of Generation Xers, of millennials are the largest group, and the Zs. These are all people of childbearing years. The Xers are getting a little bit up there, though. But the millennials and the Zs, they're the ones having the kids. And as Catholics, you can't just stop at one, okay? You're going to have like 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11 kids, okay? So you got all a tribe of kids, and you raising them in this Orthodox church, and the Vatican ain't none happier. Okay, that is why they're cutting down all of this stuff. Not only is it the radicalization of the people on the far end of it who take this stuff and use it and weaponize it within the faith, but it's this overwhelming growth of young people who are demanding tradition, who are demanding order, who are demanding orthodoxy. And they're trying to shy away from that in many respects to meet the demands of the world. But it's the younger generation that want this. So when they talk about this arcane thing, I don't think it's really there. Not in the ways that they think. Not in the ways that people who are looking for faith and tradition want and demand. We also see this in secular society. There are reports coming out now that women and men, young men, first of all, young men have taken themselves outside of the dating world. Okay, they're not even dating, having relationships or anything like that. Women in today's culture are having less casual hookups. And a lot of it has to do because of their change in lifestyle and not drinking alcohol and really standing firm in their femininity and owning that. And so there's also a chaste movement going on, chastity movement going on, pushing back against the hypersexuality and what we've got going on in this culture. And this is all being led by the younger generation. You guys, if this is our future, I think we're in good hands. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What is the role of women in the Catholic Church particularly? What can we do to really just bolster our presence and make it be seen and heard and known that women matter too, even without being in the position of leadership as priest? Go ahead and post your comments below. If you like this clip, you'll love the full conversation even more. Watch that video right here or click the link in the description. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below.